I stood in my driveway, keys dangling from my fingertips, staring at the unfamiliar Mercedes taking up half my garage space. Two matching leather suitcases sat neatly by the front door, their presence as unwelcome as a funeral invitation. I'm Marley, and this was the moment my carefully balanced life began its spectacular nosedive. Surprise! Linda's voice carried through the open door, sweet as artificial sweetener. We thought it was time for an extended visit. My stomach clenched. Extended. Such a carefully chosen word. I stepped inside to find my husband Greg performing his best impression of a guilty teenager, hands shoved deep in his pockets, shoulders hunched. Behind him, his father Derek stood ramrod straight in my living room, already eyeing the family photos on the wall like they offended his military sensibilities. How unexpected, I managed, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. Greg didn't mention you were coming. Sometimes the best surprises come unannounced, Derek said, his voice carrying that familiar note of authority that always made Greg shrink 2 inches shorter. Besides, we thought it was time to assess the situation. The situation. My mother, Ella, who'd been living with us since Dad died, appeared in the hallway. Her face went pale at the sight of Derek and Linda. She clutched her cardigan closer, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times when she felt threatened. I need to check on dinner, she murmured, retreating to the kitchen like a shadow. Greg finally found his voice. Dad thinks it would be good for everyone if they stayed with us for a while. Help us get things organized. I caught the slight tremor in his words, the way his eyes wouldn't quite meet mine. There was more to this story, something hiding behind his careful phrasing. Organized? The word tasted bitter. I wasn't aware we needed organizing. Linda bustled forward, her perfectly manicured hands fluttering like nervous birds. Oh, we just want to help. And with Ella here, we thought you could use the extra support. The implication hung in the air like smoke. I watched Derek's jaw tighten at the mention of my mother's name. He'd never approved of her moving in, had made that crystal clear at every family gathering. The guest room isn't prepared, I said, knowing full well it was currently storing my mother's belongings that wouldn't fit in her room. No matter, Derek replied, already moving toward the stairs. We can sort that out. Greg, bring up our bags. Greg jumped to attention like a well-trained puppy, grabbing the suitcases before I could protest further. I followed him to the bottom of the stairs, grabbing his arm. When were you planning to tell me about this? I hissed. He wouldn't meet my eyes. They needed a place to stay. Dad's been... There are some financial issues. It's temporary. Temporary like my mother's temporary stay? I released his arm, disgust rising in my throat. You should have talked to me first. I knew you'd say no. You're damn right I would have said no. This is our home, Greg, mine and yours, not your father's new command center. From upstairs came the sound of Derek's voice, sharp with disapproval. Greg! These bags won't move themselves. I watched my husband's face crumple slightly before he straightened his shoulders and headed upstairs, leaving me alone in the foyer. From the kitchen came the soft sounds of my mother's movements, the gentle clink of dishes that told me she was stress cooking, her way of coping with chaos. I pressed my fingers against my temples, feeling a headache building. This wasn't just an invasion of space, it was a power play. Derek Collins didn't do anything without a purpose, and showing up unannounced with luggage in tow wasn't just about financial issues. The question was, what game was he really playing? And more importantly, how many pieces of my life would be sacrificed before it was over? 3 days into the invasion, I found my mother's prized ceramic vase, the last gift from my father, wrapped in newspaper and stuffed in a box labeled donations. The sound of Derek's boots on the hardwood floor had become a constant reminder of his presence, like a metronome counting down to my inevitable explosion. He rounded the corner into the living room, clipboard in hand, looking every bit the retired colonel conducting an inspection. Ah, Marley. Good. We need to discuss the new household schedule. He tapped his pen against the clipboard. Your mother's tendency to cook at irregular hours is disrupting the natural order of things. I clutched the vase tighter. The natural order of whose things, exactly? Structure breeds success, he continued, ignoring my question. Linda and I have drafted a weekly menu plan. Your mother can assist, of course, under Linda's supervision. The vase trembled in my hands. In the kitchen, I could hear the quiet murmur of voices. My mother and Linda, probably engaged in another passive-aggressive dance over dinner preparations. My mother doesn't need supervision in her own kitchen. Derek's jaw tightened. This arrangement requires compromise. Greg agrees the changes will benefit everyone. Of course he did. Greg hadn't disagreed with his father since puberty. Speaking of my spineless husband, he chose that moment to appear, laptop tucked under his arm. Hey, what's going on? His eyes darted between us, sensing tension. Your father's reorganizing our lives, I said, setting the vase deliberately on its original shelf. Apparently, my mother's cooking schedule is chaos incarnate. It's about efficiency, Derek interjected. And speaking of efficiency, these decorative items are taking up valuable space. The donation box? Touch this vase again, and efficiency will be the least of your concerns. Greg stepped forward. Marley, maybe we could... Could what, Greg? Rearrange our entire lives to accommodate your father's control issues? That's enough. Derek's voice carried the weight of decades of command. Greg, your wife's attitude is... My attitude? I laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. You show up unannounced, commandeer our home, and now you're trying to erase every trace of my mother's presence. And you're concerned about my attitude? A crash from the kitchen silenced us all. I found my mother standing over a shattered plate, her hands shaking. Linda hovered nearby, looking both concerned and somehow satisfied. I'm so sorry, my mother whispered. My hands... I just can't seem to... It's fine, Mom. I moved to help her, but Derek blocked my path. Linda, show Ella how to clean this properly. There's a specific protocol for broken glass. My mother's face crumpled slightly. 25 years of teaching experience, and this man was treating her like an incompetent child. I'll help my mother, I said, pushing past him. Actually, Greg spoke up, his voice carrying a tremor of attempted authority. Maybe Dad's right. We could all use more structure. The betrayal felt like ice water in my veins. I turned to face my husband, really seeing him for the first time in years. Structure? Is that what we're calling this? Marley. No. I grabbed the broom myself, positioning myself between my mother and the others. This ends now. Mom, go rest. I've got this. But the dinner schedule, Linda started. We'll have to wait, I finished, sweeping the broken pieces into a neat pile. In fact, everything's going to wait until we have a real conversation about boundaries. Derek's face darkened. Greg, your wife clearly needs... Stop telling my husband what I need. The words came out quiet but sharp. And stop trying to remake this house into your personal barracks. The silence that followed was deafening. Greg looked like he wanted to dissolve into the wallpaper. Linda's hands twisted her apron. Derek stood perfectly still, his authority challenged in a way he clearly hadn't expected. We'll discuss this later, he finally said, turning on his heel and marching upstairs. I watched him go, then looked at the broken pieces at my feet. Something else had shattered today, something far more significant than a dinner plate. In the reflection of the window, I caught sight of my mother's retreating form, shoulders hunched, moving like a ghost in her own home. The rage that had been simmering for days crystallized into something colder, more focused. This wasn't just about territory anymore. This was about dignity. And if Derek Collins wanted a war, he was about to learn that not all battles are won with military precision. The bank statement sat on my desk like a loaded gun. 3 separate transfers to Derek and Linda's account over the past month, each for $5,000. The numbers blurred as my hands shook, rage and betrayal mixing into something toxic in my chest. I found Greg in his home office, headphones on, deliberately avoiding the world he'd helped create. I slapped the statement down in front of his keyboard. $15,000, Greg. Want to explain? His face went pale, then red. He pulled off his headphones slowly, like a man preparing for his execution. You weren't supposed to see that. Clearly, just like I wasn't supposed to see your parents showing up on our doorstep. Just like I wasn't supposed to notice our savings disappearing. They needed help. While my mother's medication sits in pharmacy limbo because we suddenly can't afford the copay? He pushed back from his desk, running his hands through his hair. Dad made some investments that didn't pan out. They were going to lose their house. So you decided to sacrifice ours instead? It's not that simple. It never is with you, Greg. Nothing's ever simple when it comes to standing up to Daddy dearest. A sound from the doorway made us both turn. Derek stood there, his presence filling the frame like a shadow at noon. Is there a problem here? Yes, I said, before Greg could speak. There's definitely a problem. Would you like to explain why my husband's been secretly bankrolling you? Derek's jaw tightened. Financial matters between father and son. Stop. My voice cut through his practiced authority. This isn't a military operation. This is my home, my marriage, and my money you're bleeding dry. Marley, please. Greg stood up, reaching for me. Dad's just going through a rough patch. A rough patch that requires $15,000 of our money? Money we don't have? The market will turn around, Derek said, his confidence wavering slightly. My investments were garbage, I finished. I checked, Derek. Those sure things you invested in? They were pump and dump schemes. You got played. The color drained from his face. Behind him, Linda appeared, drawn by the rising voices. Derek! What's she talking about? Nothing you need to concern yourself with, he snapped. Everything, I corrected, turning to Linda. Your husband lost everything on fake investments, and now he's draining our accounts to cover it up. Greg grabbed my arm. That's enough! I yanked away from him, something final snapping inside me. No, it's not nearly enough. Your father shows up here, takes over our home, terrorizes my mother, and all while secretly stealing our money through you, and you let him. I had no choice. You always had a choice. You just chose him. Every single time. Derek stepped forward, authority crackling around him like static. You're being hysterical. And you're being a fraud, I shot back. A fraud who's been living off his son's weakness because he can't admit he failed. The slap of Derek's hand on the desk made everyone jump. You will not speak to me that way In your what? I stepped closer, matching his intensity. Your house? Your command? This isn't your anything, Derek. This is my home, and you're not in charge here. Linda's voice came soft but clear. How much did we take? Derek turned on her. Linda, be quiet. No. She straightened her spine. How much of their money did you give away, Greg? Greg looked at his father, then at me, trapped between loyalties. Almost everything, he whispered. The savings, most of our emergency fund. The silence that followed felt like glass about to shatter. I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and saw a stranger wearing familiar skin. Pack your things, I said quietly. Marley, all of you, pack your things. You have until tomorrow. You can't just, Derek started. I can, I will. And if you're not gone by tomorrow, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what happened to the great Colonel Collins' retirement fund. I'm sure your military buddies would love to hear that story. I turned and walked out, leaving them in Greg's office. My mother stood in the hallway, tears in her eyes, but her head held high. I took her hand, squeezing it gently. We'll be okay, Mom. Behind us, I could hear Derek's voice rising, Greg's protests, Linda's quiet sobs. But they felt distant now, like a storm moving away. I had my own weather to weather, and it was time to clean house. The emergency room lights cast harsh shadows across my mother's face as she lay unconscious on the gurney. Her collapse during breakfast had shattered more than just the coffee mug she'd been holding. It had shattered any illusion that I could maintain peace at the cost of her health. Blood pressure's still elevated, the nurse said, adjusting monitors. Has she been under unusual stress lately? I stared at the IV drip, counting the seconds between drops. You could say that. Greg appeared in the doorway, his father's shadow close behind him. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. How is she? Greg asked, keeping his distance. Like you care. The words came out sharp enough to draw blood. Where were you when she was having anxiety attacks over your father's daily inspections? when she stopped eating because Linda kept criticizing her cooking. Derek stepped forward. "Now, see here. Get out!" My voice was low, dangerous. "Both of you." "She's my mother-in-law," Derek said, as if that gave him some claim. "As the head of the family." A laugh escaped me, bitter as medicine. "Head of the family? You can't even head yourself to the door without destroying everything in your path." The nurse looked between us, sensing the tension. Perhaps we should keep things calm for the patient's sake. I moved closer to my mother's bed, positioning myself between her and them. They were just leaving. Greg took a half step forward. "Marley, please, we can work this out." "Like we worked out the finances? Or maybe like we worked out your parents moving in without consulting me?" I pulled out my phone, showing him the screen. "Or perhaps like we worked out this email I found, where your father demanded you transfer more money last week." The color drained from Greg's face. Behind him, Derek went still. "That was a private conversation," Derek said. "Private like the conversation we should have had before you bankrupted us?" I turned to Greg. "Or private like the conversation we should have had before you chose your father over your wife?" "I didn't choose. You did. Every single time." I looked at my mother's pale face, then back at them. And now she's paying the price. A doctor entered, flipping through charts. "Mrs. Thompson, we need to discuss your mother's condition." "Whatever you need to say, you can say in front of family," Derek started. "No," I cut him off. "You're not family. You're parasites wearing family's skin." I turned to the doctor. They were leaving. Greg reached for my hand. "Marley," I jerked away. "The next hand you reach for better be a lawyer's, Greg, because this is done." "You don't mean that," he whispered. "Check your email. The divorce papers are already there." I watched his face crumple, feeling nothing but cold clarity. "I filed them this morning, right after I transferred what little money was left to a new account. One you can't access." Derek's authoritative mask slipped, revealing the panic beneath. "You had no right." "I had every right, just like I had every right to send copies of your investment schemes to your military pension board." I smiled, and it felt like baring teeth. "They seemed very interested in your financial activities." The monitor tracking my mother's heartbeat beeped steadily, the only sound in the sudden silence. Greg looked destroyed, Derek looked dangerous, and I felt more alive than I had in months. "You'll regret this," Derek said, his voice thick with threat. "No, I won't. But you will." I turned my back on them, taking my mother's hand. "Now get out before I call security and tell them exactly why my mother's in this bed." Their footsteps retreated, leaving behind the antiseptic smell of hospital air and the weight of decisions that couldn't be unmade. The doctor waited until they were gone before speaking. "Your mother's condition is stress-induced, but there might be underlying factors we need to address." I nodded, watching my mother's chest rise and fall. Each breath seemed like an accusation against my previous inaction, against every time I'd chosen peace over protection. "Whatever she needs," I said. "I'm done letting other people decide what's best for my family." The doctor made notes in her chart, and I sat in the hard plastic chair, planning our next moves. The house would need to be sold. Derek and Greg had seen to that with their financial drain, but maybe that was fitting. Some foundations couldn't be repaired once they'd been poisoned at the root. My mother stirred slightly, her hand tightening in mine. I squeezed back, a promise in the pressure. We'd rebuild, just the two of us. And this time, no one else would hold the blueprints to our lives. The manila envelope sat heavy in my hands as I stood outside Derek's temporary office, my former guest room. Inside were printouts of emails, bank statements, and investment records that painted a picture so damning it made my hands shake. 3 days of digging through financial records had revealed the true extent of Derek's failures. I knocked once, not waiting for a response before entering. Derek looked up from his laptop, his face hardening at my presence. "This is a private space." "Nothing's private anymore." I dropped the envelope on his desk. "Especially not your investment history." He didn't touch it. "You've been investigating me." Someone had to, since Greg wouldn't. I leaned forward, placing my palms flat on the desk. "Tell me, does Linda know about the second mortgage? Or the gambling debts?" A muscle twitched in his jaw. "You're overstepping." Like you overstepped when you lost your pension playing the market? Or when you convinced Greg to drain our savings to cover your mistakes? You don't understand. I understand perfectly. I pulled out one particular document. This is interesting. A loan application in Greg's name with a forged signature. That's fraud, Derek. Federal fraud. His hand moved toward the paper, but I snatched it back. What do you want? You gone. All of you. Tonight. A harsh laugh escaped him. Or what? You'll destroy your husband's life by reporting this? He's as complicit as I am. The difference is, I don't care about saving his life anymore. My voice remained steady, even as my heart raced. But you care about yours, don't you? About your reputation. The door opened behind me. Greg stood there, Linda hovering behind him. Perfect timing. What's going on? Greg asked, stepping inside. Show them, I said to Derek. Show them what you've been hiding, or I will. Derek's face flushed red. This is blackmail. This is consequence. I turned to Linda. Did you know your house isn't yours anymore? That Derek remortgaged it to cover his gambling debts? Linda's hand flew to her throat. Derek? He lost everything, I continued, pulling out more documents. The pension, the savings, your retirement fund. Then he came here to bleed us dry, too. Greg moved forward, reaching for the papers. Dad, what is she talking about? Your father forged your signature on loan documents, I said, watching Derek's facade crack. He's been using your identity to secure more credit. That's why he really came here, to hide from his creditors. The silence that followed felt like glass breaking in slow motion. Linda sank into a chair, her face ashen. Greg stared at his father, waiting for a denial that didn't come. I was protecting this family, Derek finally said, his voice hollow. Everything I did was for yourself, Linda whispered. All these years, telling me we needed to be careful with money, while you... I placed the envelope in front of her. Everything's there. Bank statements, loan documents, gambling receipts. He's been lying to all of you for years. Derek stood suddenly, his chair scraping back. You have no right. I have every right. The force of my voice made them all jump. You came into my home, terrorized my mother, drained our accounts, and now you want to talk about rights? Greg picked up one of the documents, his hands shaking. You forged my signature? My own father? Son, I can explain. Explain what? I cut in. How you manipulated him his entire life. How you used his fear of disappointing you to destroy his marriage. Derek moved toward me, but I stood my ground. You think you've won something here? You've destroyed your own family. No, you did that all on your own. I pulled out my phone. You have 2 hours to pack and leave. After that, these documents go to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I'm sure they'd love to hear about a retired colonel's fraud scheme. You wouldn't dare... Try me. I turned to Greg and Linda. You can go with him, or you can stay and face what he's done. Your choice. I walked out, leaving them with the evidence of their collapsing world. In the hallway, my mother stood waiting, stronger now, her eyes clear and determined. Are you sure about this? She asked softly. I took her hand, feeling the strength in her grip. Some cancers need to be cut out completely, even if it leaves a scar. The sound of raised voices filtered through the door behind us, Derek's authority crumbling, Linda's sobs, Greg's accusations. The house of cards was finally falling, and I had knocked down the first domino. Now we would see who remained standing in the wreckage. 2 hours passed like a death sentence. I sat in the kitchen, watching the clock tick down while chaos erupted upstairs, drawers slamming, voices rising and falling like a tide of accusations. My mother's hand rested on my shoulder, steady despite everything. The first police car arrived exactly when I'd planned. You actually did it, Greg said from the doorway, his voice hollow. You called them. No. I stood, straightening my spine. Your father's creditors did. Amazing how quickly they move when they learn where to find him. A second patrol car pulled up. Through the window, I watched Derek emerge from the house, his military bearing crumbling as officers approached. Linda followed, clutching her purse like a shield. "He's still my father," Greg whispered, "and she's still my mother." I gestured to Ella, who hadn't left my side. "The difference is, I chose to protect mine." The doorbell rang. Greg moved to answer it, but I stopped him. "They're here for you, too." His face went pale. "What?" "Your signature is on those loan documents, forged or not. You're complicit." The words tasted like ash. "I tried to warn you." "You're destroying everything." "No." My fist slammed the counter. "You destroyed everything when you chose him over us, when you let him drain our accounts, terrorize my mother, and steal our future." The doorbell rang again, more insistent. "Mrs. Thompson," a voice called. "Federal agents, we need to speak with Gregory Thompson." Greg's eyes darted between me and the door like a trapped animal. "Marley, please, we can fix this." "Some things can't be fixed." I moved toward the door. "Some things can only be burned down and rebuilt." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Greg lunged for the back door just as federal agents entered through the front. Derek's voice boomed from outside, demanding to speak to his son. Linda's sobs carried through the open windows. I watched them lead Greg away in handcuffs, his head bowed, finally free of his father's shadow, but bound by its consequences. Derek was already in the back of a patrol car, his authority stripped away with his freedom. "You didn't tell me about Greg," my mother said softly. "I couldn't." My voice cracked. "If I had, you would have asked me to show mercy, and I couldn't afford mercy anymore." Linda appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "How could you do this to your own family?" "Family," I laughed, the sound sharp as broken glass. "Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't force someone into the hospital with stress. Family doesn't forge signatures or gamble away futures. They'll go to prison. They should have thought of that before they committed fraud." She stepped closer, desperation in her eyes. "Greg was just trying to help his father." "And who was trying to help us?" I gestured around the kitchen, where bills lay scattered like fallen leaves. "Who was thinking about my mother when Derek was terrorizing her? Who was considering our future when they were draining our accounts?" The agents returned, requesting statements. Linda retreated to the porch, broken and alone. My mother squeezed my hand before going upstairs, leaving me to face the aftermath of my choices. Hours later, after the statements were taken and the cars had gone, I stood in my empty kitchen. The house felt haunted by the ghosts of what we'd lost: my marriage, Greg's freedom, the illusion of family we'd maintained for so long. My phone buzzed with messages from Greg's relatives, each one more accusatory than the last. I deleted them all without reading. The local news would have the story by morning. Respected military officer and son arrested for fraud. Our name would be mud in this town. "Was it worth it?" my mother asked, appearing beside me. I stared at the empty driveway where Derek's Mercedes had sat just hours ago. "Ask me tomorrow." She touched my cheek, wiping away tears I hadn't realized were falling. "Sometimes protecting what we love means losing what we thought we couldn't live without." I nodded, unable to speak. The victory I'd imagined felt hollow, tainted by the cost. I'd won the war, but lost pieces of myself in the battle. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, paperwork, and the long process of rebuilding from the ashes of what we'd been. But tonight, in the quiet aftermath of destruction, I wondered if revenge and justice were really the same thing after all. The visiting room at the county jail smelled of despair and industrial cleaner. I sat across from Greg, the scratched plexiglass between us reflecting our fractured reality. His orange jumpsuit made him look smaller, diminished without his father's shadow looming over him. "Linda came to see me yesterday," he said into the phone receiver. "She told me what she did." I leaned forward. "What are you talking about?" "The money she's been hiding from Dad. All these years, she was squirreling away cash, preparing for—" He trailed off, looking down. "She wants to make it right." A knock on the window interrupted us. Linda stood in the doorway, clutching her familiar purse. The guard let her in, and she took the seat next to Greg, her hands trembling as she lifted another receiver. I should have stopped him years ago, she said, her voice thin through the phone. I knew what Derek was doing, how he controlled everything, everyone. I was a coward. Linda. She reached into her purse, pulling out a thick envelope. $200,000. I've been saving it since Greg was in high school. Every time Derek made a bad investment or took control of our accounts, I skimmed a little off the top, just in case. Greg stared at his mother like he'd never seen her before. Mom? I watched him break you down, she continued, looking at her son. Made you think you needed his approval to breathe. And then I watched him try to do the same thing to your wife, to your home. She slid the envelope through the transfer slot. This won't fix everything, but it might help rebuild what Derek destroyed. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Bank statements, account numbers, transfer instructions, everything needed to access her secret fund. Why now? I asked. Because you did what I never could. Linda's eyes filled with tears. You stood up to him. You protected your mother while I failed to protect my son. Greg pressed his hand against the plexiglass. Mom, you didn't fail. I did. Her voice cracked. I let him mold you into his shadow. Let him convince you that love meant blind obedience. And when he started destroying your marriage, I stayed silent again. I stared at the envelope, feeling the weight of years of silent rebellion in my hands. Derek doesn't know about this money? Linda's laugh was bitter. Derek never thought I was smart enough to manage money. Never questioned why I insisted on keeping my nursing job part-time, even after retirement. He was too busy playing soldier with other people's lives to notice his own wife's rebellion. A guard approached, signaling our time was almost up. Take it, Linda urged. Use it to rebuild, to protect your mother the way I should have protected my family. Greg's face contorted with emotion. Marley, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. No, I cut him off. You don't. But maybe you deserve the chance to learn from your mother's example, to understand that real strength isn't in control or power. Linda stood, her spine straight for the first time since I'd known her. I'm filing for divorce. Derek can face his consequences alone. I clutched the envelope, feeling the strange weight of unexpected alliance. What will you do? Start over, like you're doing. She touched the glass separating her from her son. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is admit we've been wrong and try to make it right. Greg pressed his hand against his mother's through the barrier. I'm sorry, Mom, for not seeing what he was doing to all of us. The guard stepped forward again, more insistent. I stood, holding Linda's gaze. This doesn't erase what happened. No, she agreed, but maybe it helps build something new from the ashes. As we left Greg behind, Linda and I walked through the prison corridors in silence. The money in my bag felt like a torch, burning away the last vestiges of Derek's control over both our lives. Outside, in the harsh sunlight, Linda turned to me. I know it's too late to be the mother-in-law you deserved, but maybe we can be something else. Something stronger. I thought of my own mother waiting at home, of the strength it takes to protect what matters. Maybe we can. The future stretched before us, uncertain but free from the shadows that had darkened our lives for so long. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected sources, and redemption wears faces we never thought to trust. The last box from Greg's office sat on our doorstep, a final punctuation mark on our marriage. Inside, I found his coffee mug from our honeymoon, a photo of us in happier times, and a letter I wasn't ready to read. My mother worked in her garden, the morning sun catching silver in her hair. She looked stronger now, her hands steady as she planted new roses where Derek's Mercedes had once leaked oil on our driveway. The doorbell rang. Linda stood there, holding a casserole dish like a peace offering. Old habits, she said with a small smile. Though I made this one myself, no supervision required. We sat in the kitchen, the same space where Derek had once tried to impose his military precision on our lives. Now it felt lighter, as if the house itself could breathe again. Greg's sentencing is next week, Linda said, stirring her tea. Derek's already serving his time. I know. I pushed Greg's letter across the table, still unopened. He keeps writing. Linda nodded, understanding in her eyes. Sometimes the hardest part of standing up for yourself is staying standing when they try to pull you back down. Through the window, I watched my mother tend to her roses, remembering how she used to flinch at sudden noises, how she'd made herself smaller to avoid Derek's criticism. I used to think revenge would feel better than this, I admitted. More final. Justice rarely feels the way we expect. Linda touched the envelope. Greg's learning that too, the hard way. Are you still going through with the divorce? She straightened her spine, echoing the strength I'd seen growing in her since that day in the prison. Derek's actions were his choice. My freedom is mine. The sound of laughter drifted through the window, my mother talking to someone. We both looked out to see her chatting with our neighbor, her gestures animated as she discussed her gardening. No fear, no hesitation. Sometimes I wonder if I went too far, I said quietly. If there was another way. There's always another way. Linda's voice was gentle but firm. But sometimes the path we choose isn't about finding the best way. It's about finding the way that lets us live with ourselves afterward. I finally picked up Greg's letter, feeling its weight. He wants to make amends. Do you want him to? The question hung in the air between us. Outside, my mother's roses turned their faces to the sun, growing despite the soil's memory of concrete and oil. I want him to understand, I said finally. Not just apologize, really understand what it means to choose yourself over someone else's control. Linda reached across the table, her hand covering mine. Then maybe that's your real victory. Not the revenge, not even the justice, the understanding. I opened the letter, Greg's familiar handwriting spilling across the page, but instead of reading it, I stood and walked to the garden. My mother looked up as I approached, her smile genuine and unguarded. Linda brought lunch, I said, holding up the letter. And Greg sent one more message. My mother patted the earth around a new rose bush. Are you ready to read it? I looked at the letter, then at the garden where Derek's authority had once cast shadows. The roses were already reaching higher than his Mercedes had stood. No, I said, and felt the truth of it settle into my bones. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I tucked the letter into my pocket, unread. Some chapters didn't need a final word to be finished. Some victories weren't about winning or losing, but about choosing when to stop fighting. My mother nodded, understanding without words. She handed me a trowel, and together we turned the soil where Linda's car now sat in our driveway, making space for new growth. Behind us, Linda appeared with gardening gloves, ready to help plant whatever came next. 3 women who had learned that sometimes family isn't about blood or marriage, but about who stands with you in the garden after the storm passes. The roses would bloom in their own time, and so would we.